It looks like the transfer of charters from Stewart-Haas Racing to 2311 Racing and Front Row Motorsports has hit a roadblock. Let's talk about that, plus updates to practice and qualifying for 2025, off-season penalty reports, and so much more. Let's get to it. Hey everyone, it's Taylor Kitchen and welcome back to Above the Line on the ATYL Media channel, where we do motorsports media your way. And on this show, we talk about NASCAR all the time. And before we get into the slew of NASCAR news that was announced in the past few days, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you know when me and my amazing team post content. With all that said, let's dive into some news that was announced this morning from Spire Motorsports. They announced that Caruth is returning to the number 71 truck full-time in 2025, with HendrickCars.com continuing to back them. This was a very busy morning for Caruth. Not only was this announced, but he walked across the commencement stage at Winston-Salem State University, obtaining his Bachelor of Science degree in Motorsports Management, a major accomplishment, so congrats to him. I can't even imagine being a full-time driver at NASCAR's top 3 levels, traveling all the time. Meanwhile, you're trying to complete 120 credit hours, projects, essays. It's just so much. So a major accomplishment for Raja, and a major accomplishment to re-sign with Spire as well. It's been great to see Caruth grow and mature as a driver with this organization, and seeing how Spire Motorsports has really helped elevate him. In the meantime, I think it's been awesome to see Spire Motorsports grow their organization, bringing in some really key figures to help make their competition department and just organization as a whole way better into the future. I ultimately think Raja is in really good hands, and I'm excited to see what he and his team can accomplish in 2025. Speaking of the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series, there is a penalty for one of the drivers that was issued a few weeks ago, and we now have a verdict on if that penalty was upheld or not. The National Motorsports Appeals Panel announced on Wednesday that the $12,500 fine for Ty Majeski will be upheld for missing an essential media obligation. In reaching their decision, the appeals panel said, quote, "Driver failed to meet contractual agreement with NASCAR, one of the most, if not most, important media obligations of the entire season." Ty Majeski skipped out on the championship for media availability for the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series prior to the Phoenix race, which is a big deal, but he missed it for a bigger deal, which was to vote. However, where things went wrong is Majeski did not inform NASCAR of why he was going to miss this event, and NASCAR wasn't aware of the reason until after the penalty was dished out. According to an article on NASCAR.com, a NASCAR spokesperson said, "We would have been willing to work with him on the timing if we would have known the reason beforehand." So let this be a lesson that communication is key. It sucks to see some of his championship earnings are going towards a fine that could have been avoided with a simple text or an email. So that is the news there. The National Motorsports Appeals Panel has upheld the $12,500 fine for Ty Majeski. Let's move on. Let's talk about the changes that NASCAR made to their practice and qualifying procedures. At the end of the NASCAR season, I could not keep up with how qualifying was working. I really couldn't. The media members struggle to understand it, and that's a big problem. If your viewers, especially your media members, cannot understand how qualifying is done for the most part, you have a problem as a series. So the hope was that NASCAR would look at this amongst many other things and make essential changes, and thank God they did. So NASCAR announced that they made changes to practice and qualifying procedures to streamline the procedures a little bit, create consistency amongst the top 3 series, and most importantly, add in practice time. Though it's not a lot, we're going from 25 minutes per series, it still is a small win. Practice will still be done in 2 different groups, but as for qualifying, with the exception of superspeedway types of races like Atlanta, Talladega, and Daytona, we will have single round qualifying efforts where your starting position will be determined by your qualifying speed alone. So NASCAR took a step back. They're simplifying things, which I am incredibly happy about. For superspeedway racing, qualifying will be done in 2 different rounds. Everyone will lay down a lap time, and then the top 10 qualifiers from round 1 will move on to the final round. So similar to what we have seen this past season. And though road course racing will have single round qualifying efforts, they will be done in 2 different groups. Each group will have 20 minutes with multiple cars on track to lay down the fastest lap time. These procedures will be the same for the Truck Series and the Xfinity Series, so again, consistency amongst the top 3 NASCAR National Series, which is a major plus. NASCAR also announced extended practice times for several different tracks throughout the NASCAR season for all 3 series, including the Daytona 500 weekend, Mexico City weekend, the All-Star race, the Clash. So there will be extended practice time when necessary for all 3 series, which is also a plus. And as a reminder for the Cup Series, practice and qualifying is going to be on different platforms this year. Practice and qualifying for the first half of the season for the NASCAR Cup Series will be on Amazon Prime Video, with the exception of the Clash, the Daytona 500, and the All-Star race, which will all have their practice and qualifying sessions aired on Fox Sports. For the second half of the season, practice and qualifying for the Cup Series will be on TNT. So there's the update there, so you know where to find practice and qualifying for next season. But ultimately, really good to see NASCAR streamlining this and simplifying this, even if I'm still going to have to look at my notes a little bit to make sure I have the procedures down pat during the first half of the 2025 season. So at least we know for certain what practice and qualifying is going to look like next season. However, what we don't know for the 2025 season is what the field is going to look like for the Cup Series, because yes, we have some lawsuit updates. At this point, it's mid-December. It's crunch time. There were a host of new filings for the federal antitrust lawsuit between NASCAR, Front Row Motorsports, and 2311 Racing. Amongst that, some potential issues with the transfer of charters from Stewart-Haas Racing to 2311 Racing and Front Row Motorsports, and a new judge that will preside over this case. So let's talk about that first. So Judge Frank D. Whitney, that issued the ruling for the first preliminary injunction, is no longer a part of the case. The new judge is Kenneth D. Bell. If you remember to the very beginning of all this, when the teams announced that they were filing this lawsuit, there was a potential conflict of interest mentioned. The local attorney for NASCAR worked for Judge Frank D. Whitney as a clerk for over a decade. When the judge offered to recuse himself before the case began, 2311 Racing and Front Row Motorsports deemed that it wouldn't be an issue. Of course, now we have a new judge, so very interesting news there amongst several of the new filings. Meanwhile, the teams filed a new preliminary injunction as they say their circumstances have changed. So what has changed for these teams? Well, according to them, there is a deadline in place for next week for the purchase of the SHR charters. So now the teams are asking NASCAR to approve the transfer of these charters without waiving their rights to pursue this federal antitrust lawsuit. What's interesting about all this, according to Bob Pockrass, is that GM of Front Row Motorsports, Jerry Freese, said that NASCAR approved the charter transfer back in September. However, after the official paperwork was filed, NASCAR said that they would have to drop the federal antitrust lawsuit for the transfer to go through. To add some fuel to the fire, Joe Custer from Stewart-Haas Racing said that NASCAR told him on multiple occasions that the transfer of the charters would go through. And not only is this frustrating for the two teams that are trying to get this charters, but think about how frustrating this is for Joe Custer and Stewart-Haas Racing. They don't have the infrastructure or the employees to run 2 full-time entries now with their new endeavor of Haas Factory Team. It's a lot for this team to take on, and they do not have the infrastructure to continue running these 2 charters, with the idea that they would have been transferred already to 2311 Racing and Front Row Motorsports. So a very frustrating situation for them for sure. And even with all of this and a new preliminary injunction filed, NASCAR said that the second filing really has no differences at all. The teams still have not been able to prove immediate irreparable harm. From NASCAR's standpoint, nothing really changes. They still plan on running 32 chartered entries in 2025, and they are continuing their quest to dismiss this federal antitrust lawsuit entirely. With all that said, what happens next? Well, on Monday, December 16th, the teams have the opportunity to respond to NASCAR's motion for dismissal. And beyond that, we're waiting for the timeline. And of course, we'll keep you up to date here at Above the Yellow Line. So there's a lot of complicated, heavy news there, but let's end on a positive note with some news from Trackhouse Racing. If you all remember back in August, we had Connor Zilisch on ATYL Live the day after he announced his full-time endeavors with Junior Motorsports in 2025. As part of that conversation, I asked him, have you and Justin Marks talked about what other racing series you want to be part of next year? And as part of that, he said this.
I've talked about, wanting to run the 24 Hours of Daytona, and, I'm trying to push him into trying to run a team with, me and my teammates at Trackhouse. I feel like that'd be really cool.
That'd be awesome.
And obviously he's got a love for sports car racing because he's done it in the past. So, that is one thing I've tried to get into his brain, but I don't know how much he's going to listen to me on that one. Even though it would be really cool.
This year, Connor Zilisch became the second youngest Rolex 24 winner, and he shared with us that he would love to race in the Rolex 24 in the future with his Trackhouse teammates, and it looks like that's kind of going to happen. Trackhouse Racing announced they will partner with TF Sports to field a Chevrolet Corvette in the GT Daytona Pro Class for the 63rd running of the Rolex 24 at Daytona. Of course, we know Connor Zilisch is going to be part of this team, but he will also be teammates with Shane Van Gisbergen, Scott McLaughlin, and Ben Keating. So we have 2 Americans and 2 New Zealanders on this team, which I think is really cool. As we know, Trackhouse Racing has a mission of being a global racing team, which they are successful in with entries in MotoGP. And having this mix of drivers from different places, different backgrounds, and even different ages, I think makes up a really cool and really talented team. So I'm excited to see how they do. I would not be surprised if they won. So we will have to see how it goes. But I watched my first Rolex 24 this January, and I fell in love with it. Not only was it a cool just event to be a part of with watching along with the community for 24 hours straight, but the racing at night at Daytona is spectacular. It's beautiful. There is nothing like it. I hope to go to the Rolex 24 one day, but for now, I will be watching January 25th and 26th. And of course, the Roar before the 24 is happening on January 16th and 19th. So make sure to keep up with all of that. And if you have not watched the Rolex 24 before, make sure to do it this year. It should be a really good one. So what are your thoughts on the latest NASCAR news? Make sure to tell me in the comments below. And with that, we are done with this episode of Above the Yellow Line. Make sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms and visit AboveTheYellowLine.com for all the ATYL Media news and merch. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this with your friends and family. Thank you all so much, and until next time, I'll see ya. Bye.